Hello folks, today I would like to talk about glazing. So this is my fourth session with this painting and I'm at a stage where I can start adding glazes, which I'm going to do with my apple. I'm going to focus on that and increase the saturation of that red color. Now glazing is great for these types of things. So it really works well when you have a very intense or a very vibrant color and you're trying to increase that color. A lot of times when you work directly, it's hard to do. So glazing essentially is another way of really intensifying that red. And I am going to be adjusting the chroma. I'm also probably going to make a subtle adjustment in the hue. So I'm going to make the red a little bit cooler. And I'm probably also going to slightly darken the value. So I'm actually working with all three components: chroma, value, and hue. And I'm going to be making adjustments on all three of those with the glaze that I'm about to use. Now what I've done here is I've just set up my palette and I put it right next to the painting so you can easily see what I'm going to be doing over here with my mixtures. But I set up my palette from light to dark and warm to cool, which is what I typically do. So this color at the very top is my cad yellow light. Then I have a cad red light, a cad red medium, a quinacridone red, which is a beautiful color. It's similar to a rose madder. This is actually a mixture of my quinacridone red with my ultramarine blue. So that gives me a slightly deeper violet, more of a cooler violet. And then here I have my cobalt violet. And then this, as I said, is my ultramarine blue. So I'm really probably not going to be using any white. I may at some point add white, I'm not sure if I decide to work back into the glaze, but glazing is really transparent color and the white is going to make it more opaque. So I won't be doing any large mixtures with the white. With the quinacridone red and the ultramarine blue. So if I just brush that out more transparently, it appears warmer. You can see that has a warm undertone. And I think that might work really well. So for glazing, what I do is I saturate the brush first with the medium. And you could even take some of your medium with your brush and put a little puddle on the side of the palette here like that, just to work the color into. And then take that color and brush it into that. So that just gives it more flow. It makes it a little more transparent. And my mixture of medium is, now I'm working with about 1/3 turpentine to 2/3 oil. Okay, so definitely cooler than what I have right now. Let's see how that looks when I put it on the painting. So I look for that true color of the apple, and again I said that happens right in the half tone there, right where the shadow and the light come together, and that's pretty close to that red. It definitely cools it down.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When you say halftone, that's what it means? The transition between the dark and the light?
Yeah, so it's not your dark and it's not your light. It's the what happens right in between.
Okay.
Yeah, so I talk about that a lot when I'm talking about just working with values too. When I'm shading, you have your shadow, and then you have your light, and then you have that transitional value between the shadow and the light. And the light tends to wash the color out, so it's not necessarily a good way of judging the local color. Light just has a, you know, especially with more intense colors, it just eats the color up.
Mhm.
Whereas the shadow obviously darkens it. So whenever you're trying to think about the local color, the actual color of the object, you know, usually that's where you'll see it, in that halftone. But let's just throw this over the whole thing. Even my shadow, I'm just going to do a general glaze over everything.
That is an amazing color to like, really hit it. But when you look at it on the palette, it doesn't look like it's going to.
Yeah, well here I'm looking at the color over the gray. Here I'm looking at it over the red. So it's much warmer when I put it on the painting. And that's kind of the tricky thing with glazing, is you don't really know what you're going to get until you put it on. So you can adjust as you go. I don't always hit it my first tries. I got lucky here. But if it was too cool, for example, I could always warm it up with some of my warmer reds if I wanted to. And so here I have a couple options. I could just sort of brush out my glaze and transition it into this area if I wanted to, which might be a nice effect. Or I could just glaze over the whole thing and then add those warmer, lighter reds back into it. So just going to brush. I'm going to brush it over the whole thing, but I'm going to even go a little bit more transparent in that area to let some of that other color show through a little more. Yeah, and what I'm doing too is I'm re-wetting everything, so when I do decide to go back in there and work, I'm going to probably add some of those little details again. It'll just be very easy to blend because it's being put down into a wet area. My highlight, I may, well, I'm going to leave some of that. I'm just going to glaze around the edges. So just have that transition a little bit into the red. And then I'll leave the center. Just like that. Okay, now I have a really strong saturated red again. I'm just going to throw a little bit more down here. The only way you can actually do this, though, is if the paint is completely dry. So that's what you want to be careful of. If it's slightly wet, this won't work. You'll end up lifting the paint, and I haven't worked on this at all since our last session, so I know that's dry. That's not going to go anywhere. I could even take some of this original glaze and I could just add other colors to that, if I wanted to make another adjustment. But I'm taking my cobalt violet and I'm just adding it right into that mixture. And right down here, I'm just going to throw that in and see what that does. That looks pretty good, though, I think.
Yeah, it really does.
I'm going to throw a little more even up in here and let it sort of transition into the this area. Just cool down all of my shadows. So again, now I have warm light, cool shadows. And actually that highlight, I'm going to try to address that because that's dulled down. So that is something I will do. I'll just grab my white and I'm going to work the opaque highlight back into the glaze. So with something like that, I won't use as much medium. I'll just use more of the direct paint. I'm going to switch over to a smaller brush for this. So definitely white, and I see a tiny bit of, looks like some yellow maybe in that highlight. So let me try adding a little bit of that. So again, I'm looking for the influence of color in the light, in the highlights. You always want to do that. Talked about that last week. You never really see just a pure white, or almost never. So I think that might suffice as a highlight color. Let's just see. Put it down, and then I can blend it. Just want to make sure the color and the value is right. Switch over to the smaller brushes now that I'm working details into this. Just kind of blend around the edges, let that sink in to what's already there, and then if I wanted to, I could always hit it with a dry brush too. So it's not going to be as bright as my highlight. I want to make sure that I'm paying close attention to that. Here's where values really come into play. This goes back to values. I want to look at the differences between a reflective light and highlights. What I'm going to do is start bringing back some of those subtle textures in the skin. Really just differences in color. And they're kind of orange, those little dots. So I'm going to mix up something that's a bit warmer. So probably just take my yellow and my warm red, that's my cad red light. See what that does. Remember, the red is very powerful, so I don't need a lot. Maybe even a little bit of this too. A little bit of white in it. Okay, so I'm wrapping this apple up, and what I really started to notice as I started working back into the light was that I had a warm halo of a very sort of pale orange around my highlight. So once again, my highlight, I consider that to be cool. I see a little bit of blue in the highlight, and then right around that, this halo right here becomes warm as it starts to move more into an orange hue. Then as I start to transition into the halftone, that becomes a little bit cooler again. I start to see a tiny bit of violet, a reddish violet starting to come into play right around here. And then my shadow becomes even cooler still as I get some of the blue cloth reflecting into that. So it's really important to understand the values as that helps to reveal the form, the light and dark variations, but then as I start adding color, I'm also really paying very close attention to those shifts in the hue. What is a warm hue versus what is a cool hue? And that also helps to reveal the form. And a lot of times you'll see that alternating. So we go from cool highlight to warm light. And then as I move towards the halftone, once again, cool as I get a little bit more of the bluish violet, and then the shadow is cooler still just because I do have such a strong reflective color of the blue bouncing into that shadow.